Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Road to Lead, your podcast for all things succession planning. I'm M. Michelle DeRosier, your host, and today we have with us what I'm hoping is a really interesting conversation with John Hagan. I'll turn it over to John.
Okay. Yeah. So my name is John Hagan. I'm an ecologist by training. I spent most of my career studying things about nature, mostly in the Northeast U.S., but some in the tropics as well, for an environmental nonprofit that had been around for about half a century. So it was a long, well-established organization. After about 20 years of doing the science thing, what often happens to us is we get invited to take more of a leadership role in nonprofits. And so the board asked me to step in as president of this organization. It's about a $5 million a year nonprofit to give people a sense of scale. Has a staff of 30 or 35, 40 sometimes. So I switched from being a program person to being an administrator and a leader within the organization. So that was, as you can imagine, a real shift in function for someone who was especially a scientist. We tend to be introverted and don't enjoy talking to other people that much. We'd rather be outside in the middle of nowhere. But still, so that was an interesting transition for me. I like to try different things, learn new things, experience different challenges. So that's really what prompted me to step in as in the role of president at my former organization.
So John wrote an article for the Stanford Social Innovation Review. It's called The Upside of Nonprofit Burnout. And as I was reading the article, one of the questions that prompted me to reach out to John was his question to himself. Are we basically caught up in a nonprofit industrial complex that's inefficient simply because we're trying to keep donors happy? Or are we really, as nonprofit leaders, looking to make change? Definitely include your article in the show notes, but I'd love for you to talk through the process of how that conversation came about and the fact that you did leave your organization before COVID. So it wasn't a COVID decision, but it felt like it was years of not necessarily believing that you, as a leader, and the way that the nonprofit is set up allows you to really think about complex situations and solving for the problems that were created to solve, but more just to deal with making sure everything is efficient and keeping everybody happy, but not really focusing as much as we should on the mission. So I'd love for you to tell that story.
Yeah, sure. And stop me at any point and ask questions or ask me to
Hmm.
clarify. But it's hard to even know where to begin the story. I had been president of this nonprofit for 11 years or 10 years when I had decided that I was going to step down. And a couple things were going on. One is I just realized, as I said in this article, that being president, I didn't think was the best use of my skills. And so that, it was well, as I said in the art, pretty well paying job, and respected job. It was an important
Hmm.
job. I felt like it was important, but I also came to the conclusion that it wasn't uh, how I should be using my time. And of course, it's a lot of administration, a lot of supporting the board. I mean, I felt like I did that 100% of the time. It wasn't that bad, but so I said, well, I was, okay, I was 63 and I was not dead yet. so so I decided that I was going to stop and try to focus on things that I wanted to do that used my skills the best. And I didn't really have a particular plan when I gave my notice. I just knew that I needed to spend the rest of my time, my career, doing things that took advantage of my skills. And I know I'd make a lot less money, probably make a lot less money, but I would be having, I suspected having more of an effect, and certainly having more of an would make me feel I was having more of an impact. At the same time, so that was going on for me personally, and I think all of us should probably say, as I said in the article, am I doing what I'm best at in
Yeah.
this particular position? And I
Hmm.
hadn't really reflected on that until the end, and I said, well, no, I'm not.
Mhm.
But the other thing I think having left the nonprofit sector, I've since started a new nonprofit. I'm the sole employee. Uh, but I just started to reflect on the nonprofit, the industrial complex, and how much time we spend at least I did, supporting our governance structure. And we had all these committees and finance committee and development committee and programs committee and then the full board. And it just got to be, it seemed like to me, a ridiculous amount of governance.
Mhm.
And it seemed like to me, gee, could you be too well governed? Because this is an awful lot of governance. Um, I thought, so I've thought more sense on, just what are we doing in the nonprofit sector? And not just so for me, it was I'm not allocating my time to my best skills or my best assets. But I
Mhm.
started to think, I'm not sure nonprofits are really that efficient either,
Hmm.
because we spend so much time doing things that aren't actually solving the problem. And I think we've got whatever the problem or problems that we were set up to solve, a lot of time gets diverted
Mhm.
to the governance, at least in our organization. So I was just more, and I don't have an answer for it yet.
Yeah.
I mean, I just know I feel like it's a lot of the nonprofit sector is broken,
Mhm.
and I don't know what to do about it yet, but I have thought about it. And, maybe we can work on that in our conversations today.
I had a conversation with the founder and former ED of Shelter Music Boston, Julie Levin, about whether or not as a field we've outgrown the need for a board, and especially given that the board comes a lot of times from corporate, a lot of times from financial institutions, and they're trying to impart their ways of working onto nonprofit that has completely different purposes for existing as an organization. We were just having the conversation around is there a need for an evolution away from boards governing nonprofit, whether that makes sense. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that too.
Well, I think you're right. It's something about the structure or the composition of the board that's one of the broken pieces. And I had a board. I had a roughly 20-person board, and they were, I liked them all. They were really neat, well-educated, well-meaning people, um, and they knew a lot about whatever, they knew a lot about whatever their discipline
Mhm.
was. Uh, but they mostly were well, they mostly were not from the work that we did as an organization,
Mhm.
this scientific, environmental scientific kind of work. They did not have those skills. And I felt like, and yes, our board was built, at least with, like, I think all boards, Michelle, or at least part of it is
Mhm.
their capacity to give to the organization, to support the
Mhm.
organization with, $10,000 or 50,000 or 100, depending on the size of your organization. They're chosen in
Mhm.
part to support, the core functions of the organization. And I think that's okay, but I felt like our board was never really curious about the underlying problems, the why of the underlying problems we were trying to solve. We would
Mhm.
spend, most of our board meetings would be reporting on the financial status, looking at the revenue to date, and all
Mhm.
all financial stuff. Um, and some of the governance, nominating committee for the board, and I don't know that we ever really it took up time in a board meeting to dissect the issues that we were there to
Mhm.
solve as
Mhm.
an organization. And I guess I tried a few times to open up that conversation with the board,
Mhm.
and it never really resonated. I didn't feel like it really interested them that much. It was
Mhm.
more like, do we have enough money? Are we growing?
Mhm.
The projects seem interesting, but I was looking for that intellectual curiosity from the
Mhm.
board that I didn't see mostly in our board. And I don't know whether other organizations, I mean, maybe you've got a sense of whether that's common because you've talked to so many other
Mhm.
nonprofit leaders, you may have a sense of whether that's because I was with the same organization for 33 years.
Mhm.
I just, which is really weird.
True.
I changed my function, as I said,
Yeah.
but I only knew that one organization, and like it was well run. These people had a lot of experience,
Yeah.
um, and so, but so I wonder whether our boards are really understanding the issues of our organizations. They don't have to have the answers. They
Mhm.
just need to understand the problem and be curious about it. So let me ask you if you
Mhm.
have seen that as a problem in other organizations, or do you think it's common?
I've been lucky to have some really great conversations through this podcast with several leaders from the smallest organizations to multi-million organizations. And I don't know necessarily that it's a problem of the board so much as it's a problem of the sector for the way we approach what we need boards for. Historically, our focus has been we need boards who can raise dollars for the organization. So
Mm.
to shift away from that, when folks are going through board leadership to get on nonprofit boards, most of it, I think, is around what you give and get. Obviously, you want to join the organization because you care about the mission, but there's nowhere that start diving into the questions of how do you understand the problem? Like, what does it look like in your day to day? Do you experience it? Do you see it happening in real life? Have you thought about this as an issue before? Like, there are no probing questions on these applications. So it's really difficult to set up somebody to be curious, to delve deeper into the issue if the way that we're onboarding them into being board member is what can you give, what can you get. To me, it's a little bit not necessarily unfair, but it's challenging to expect them to do differently than what we are asking them to come in to do.
I think a lot of execs, for former execs like me, would say, "Look, we need that money. You know, if we didn't have a giving board, we'd be
Yes,
$500,000 short
absolutely.
of our goal." Like, okay, so that's a great idea, but what are we supposed? How are we supposed to make up that? If we shift it to some other model of board membership, we still need that money. So I
Hmm.
feel like it's a catch 22. How do you
Yeah,
get out of it? And it's a practical, real issue. So I think we need to solve
hmm.
that.
Yeah.
Um, so what? Let's see. One of the um, is there some way to have a board that knows and cares deeply about
Hmm.
the subject, but have a separate entity that is your donor
Hmm.
uh, group? It sounds like more governance, I
Mm.
guess, to have another group of some sort. I don't know that boards understand we need help thinking through problems sort of at the deepest level. And they can't do that for us. They can do
Mhm.
other things for us.
Mhm.
But it almost begs for another model where they get to keep giving and caring about the organization,
Mhm.
but we've got a different entity that helps us maybe take the time to think through the issues we're working on. That's the only thing I've come up with yet that might be some alternative model because we still need the money, and
Mhm.
there's way more demand from
Absolutely.
us than there is
Mhm.
money to give to
Yeah.
us in the
Mhm.
nonprofit sector. It's a competitive world. So
Mhm.
anyway, any thoughts about any of that?
If we're thinking about the idea of over governing to the point where we're being inefficient, I don't know necessarily it's a makeup of two different types of board. It's an expansion on what they're doing with it. I feel like there are always going to be some people who come in and say, the commitment that I can make to this organization is to give the money, is to raise the money. And this is all I have the capacity to do right now because we know
Mhm.
that we're bringing in a lot of people who are time is limited for them. And then I think there are going to be the folks who are interested in coming in as a thought partner. At least your board chair should be both a thought partner and a fundraiser for them to be really efficient in supporting you in the mission of the organization. So I don't know necessarily it's a different structure. It's trying to cultivate folks on the board to be part of that 3, 4, 5 group of people who will help you really think through how do we solve for this problem.
Well, maybe that's a possible model. Maybe, I had an executive committee too. Possibly I could have engaged that group, in a deeper, more thoughtful conversation. We could have all taken back to the
Hmm.
full board, had a bigger conversation in the full board meetings. I felt like we spent way too much time on the little stuff and
Hmm.
not on the big stuff.
Yeah.
Like why are we here?
Yeah.
And are we effective? And not being effective is only a problem if you don't ask that question.
Mhm.
You don't ask, are
Absolutely.
we effective? And I don't mean a bunch of quantitative metrics necessarily. I mean, are we making a difference?
Yeah.
Not necessarily quantitatively, um, and then just the underlying understanding. I mean, we worked on complex things that were part scientific and part social and part political, and
Mhm.
they were just incredibly complicated, like sustaining life on Earth.
Yeah.
And how are we going to get through the next half century? Okay, that's
The
complicated.
little things. Yeah.
Yeah. Towards the end of my tenure as president, I did get smarter about the board. I mean, because the board looked, and I don't know that this is normal either, but the board
Mhm.
mostly looked to me to find new board members.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh, and I was kind of fine with that. I found most of the new board members
Mhm.
and brought them to the board. We came across a article called "Ditch the Matrix" at some
Mm.
point. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I
If
have
you
not.
just Google "Ditch the Matrix," it was about a new model for selecting board members. The last 3 years of my tenure started using that, and it basically s- said, "Ask yourself,
Mhm.
me the CEO, what is it you need someone to do for you? Something specific that you need to be done to
Okay.
crack open an opportunity or advance the organization's one of its programs or in some special way." So I started, instead of thinking, well, how much money does this person have?
Mhm.
What do I need done? One example was we had built a program to help the grocery sector be more sustainable.
Okay.
Perfectly good thing to do. But we were struggling to get connections to grocery executives across the country. So I brought on a board member who was a former executive in some kind of a grocery nonprofit. I can't remember the name of it at this
Mhm.
point. But the point is, I needed him to open doors for us
Mhm.
so that we could get in and talk to the grocery sector about
Mhm.
sustainability. And I didn't really care how much money. I didn't care if he gave any money, because if he
Yeah.
could open that door, that would be worth more than he could ever give us.
Absolutely.
You see what I mean? So started saying, and very methodically saying, what is it I need done? Who could do that for us at a board, sort of a senior level? And that was working better. I mean, you often find people with money who can
Mhm.
give money, but also have connections that can do something very specific for you. And I think that was working better for us at the end. I would refer anyone to that article because it will make you think differently about your board moving forward.
That's a really good approach. And it also starts opening you up to see, are there people missing on your board that should be there? The mission that you're serving, are there people who are working in the trenches that know about the work, that understand the work, could be on your board? My organization, for example, I could be, our goal is to reach high school students in underserved communities to help connect them to a broad network of professional support that they need to navigate their goals. A youth serving organization, we are going to be supported by the teachers who are in the classrooms with the students. So a teacher should be on every board of a youth serving organization. Student themselves, because we're not building for them, we're building with them, should be on your board. They should have equal vote, equal say. The idea of talking about not so much looking at the dollars, but what is it that you need from each person, then starts to broaden the diversity of the people that you have on your board.
Well, that's really well said. I can't do any better than that. Looking back, I know now that people that we worked with in the field, if you will, and I were, they tended to be fishermen or farmers or foresters
Mhm.
that tend to be in the people in the natural resource sector, often rural people and often conservative, inherently politically conservative. My board was an educated, elite, progressive bunch of people who are not diverse politically or experientially. And I think that was a problem. They had very little way to understand the lives of the people that we were on the ground working with
Mhm.
every day. Just a big disconnect. And again, I
Mhm.
think it goes back to this issue of, we've got an educated elite, we've got educated elite board, um,
Mhm.
well off, educated elite boards. And I just don't think that's okay. You can have some of that, but not all of it. Can't we diversify our boards? It would be really interesting to have a more politically diverse board
Mhm.
so that we could maybe begin to bridge some of the polarization in our society at our board level. I really thought about it that way until right now. But the way I was effective at my work went before I was uh, the president
Mhm.
was to find people who were different from me,
Yeah.
but they had a different viewpoint about the world, which tended to be
Mhm.
conservative Republicans. Uh, and I don't mean to be political on your show, but
Mhm.
I just being a liberal Democrat, I don't mind saying that. I
Yeah.
sought out conservative Republicans because
Mhm.
I knew I needed to understand the world that they lived in so that we could work together on
Yeah.
solving problems. Wish I had stayed long enough to maybe bring some of that diversity, the political diversity to the board because it doesn't matter whether you're environmental stuff like I am, you pick name your issue until
Mhm.
we can work together across our political divides, we're not going to solve most of the problems we're facing right now. So diversity, back to the diversity of not just racial diversity, viewpoint diversity, experiences and understanding what other people have had to face or anyway that we were definitely missing. And
Mhm.
again, I can only speak for my own organization. We're just lacking that diversity of viewpoint, which I think is a problem for seeing new solutions.
Seems like your goal for this next phase of your organization, but the sector as a whole, you said that nonprofits need a revolution, not an evolution. We were talking about the idea of succession planning, what that succession plan was for you as you were transitioning off your old organization. Are there things that you would have done differently given the thought of the revolution as opposed to the evolution that you were talking about?
Okay, so we definitely did it by the book. There was nothing revolutionary about how we did our transition. Gave the board about 9 months notice. 2019, I said, oh, it was March, and I said by the end of December, I'm going to step down. So I gave them time to figure out what they wanted to do. Well, they could have used a whole year, but it was a very traditional transit. We'll talk about that first and then maybe about what you could have done differently. Very traditional. Okay, John announced that he's leaving. We need to embark on a process of hiring a search firm, writing a job description,
Mhm.
for the future, getting it out there, and doing interviews and all that kind of stuff. There's nothing wrong with traditional. I mean, it's what people have been using for a long time.
Mhm.
You want to find the best candidate. You want to be deliberate and careful about it because it's such an important position.
Absolutely.
So I don't really have eh, any problem with how that went. It was I mean, I didn't. What was interesting in my transition was, and I think this was mostly my decision. I didn't have anything to do with the hiring of the new president. I stayed out of it, and I wanted to stay out of it,
Yeah.
partly because I didn't want to spend time on it, and
Mhm.
partly because I felt like it was the board's decision on who they wanted to lead the org. It is the board's
It is,
decision on
yeah.
who they want to lead the organization, and I just didn't want to. I didn't want to influence any of that,
Mhm.
um, or spend a large amount of time on it, which was time consuming. So
Mhm.
the way I handled the transition from my role was I just kept doing what I was doing. I interacted with the staff just like I had before March when I just it was just I tried to create nothing but stability for the time
That
before
you
they
were
hired a new president. John is just John. He's going to call, we're going to talk. He's always there for me. You know,
Mhm.
it was the same. I just wanted everybody to feel safe and comfortable during that time when they were waiting around for a new president. It can be tough on the staff because they don't know, gosh, what's the new president going to think of my program?
Absolutely, yeah.
And maybe programs are going to go, some new ones are going to I mean, it's an unsettling time
Mhm.
for staff. I figured, well, one thing I can do is make them feel safe and secure, and just to keep doing things as we're doing, working with them in the same way I had. And I thought that worked pretty well. It
Mhm.
ended up taking a little longer than 9 months. It was a year before. So, and I did leave in December. They hired an interim president. Sort of, he was only there to help if somebody needed help. It wasn't like didn't direct things on a day-to-day basis, but it
Mhm.
was somebody the staff could go to if they had a problem or had a question. He was just kind of on call, and they had a new president in position in April, a little more than a year. I think it
Okay.
worked pretty well. I don't have any suggestions on doing anything differently from that process. Maybe you do, or maybe you've got thoughts about the transition. I thought it worked pretty well, or did a good
Mhm.
job on that transition.
I was more curious on if we were to revolutionize the idea of succession planning and board in general, what that would look like for you as you're building your new organization. How would you want that to be?
Well, I just started my new or hadn't thought about transitioning from another transition, but I guess I feel like the board is where I think I would put my attention. Like I said at the beginning,
Mhm.
I don't have all the answers
Oh, of course not.
yet about what I would do differently. So the transition worked okay. The staff were not as engaged as they probably wanted to be engaged in the process.
Okay.
I think it's inherent for staff to want to be
Mhm.
have a say and be a part of the process. I think there are probably different philosophies on that. I would have had at least one staff person on the selection committee. I think there were any staff on the selection committee. That's again, it's the board's responsibility to select a good president, not the staff's. Can't really say anything about the transition or how that should have gone differently.
I know a lot of organizations end up using a search firm and looking outside. Are there plans in place for succession planning that were maybe training up existing staff to
Well, that's
transition to leadership roles? Had that process been thought about? What did that look like in terms of internal succession planning?
Yes, okay. Did talk about, especially in my executive committee, I think it was 6 people I would meet with, usually 3 or 4 weeks before any particular board meeting. We had 4 board meetings a year. I would meet with the executive committee, and I actually found that group to be probably the best committee of, if there was a governance committee that was useful to me, it was the executive
Mhm.
committee. I could talk to about just about anything. I felt very comfortable with that group of people. Helped me a lot. We had talked a lot about transition planning. It was kind of their nature to we always have to be ready, the
Yeah.
proverbial getting hit by the bus kind of thing. Want to have thought about that.
Mhm.
And so I had been cultivating someone from within, just
Okay.
a superb COO that I thought would have been a great president. She left and took another job before I stepped out of my job, which I
Oh,
thought was
okay.
unfortunate because
Mhm.
anyway, but I had been working on the internal as well, and that is a very smart thing to do if you've got someone inside that has the potential to step in. In the end, as another philosophical uh, question for a group to ponder is if you've got somebody that's capable internally, do you still
Mhm.
want to hire a search firm and do, say, a national search, which is
Mhm.
time consuming and expensive, but probably the more responsible way to go about it. When I was hired as president, they did not do a search,
Okay.
national search. I was hired from inside,
Okay.
from a senior program person, and they felt like they wanted a scientist as president, and I knew
Mhm.
how the organization worked. So I was of internal advancement, but not when I left. So those are
Yeah.
two different models for how to go about it. And if you don't have, I can't remember the search firm, probably 100 between paying for candidates to be flown in and all that kind of stuff. It was easily $100,000 plus to that
Okay.
search, not counting just the time consuming part
Yeah.
of it, the hours of the day. So it's a big deal to do, but it's an important one.
Mhm.
Any thoughts about that you have?
I was curious about the preparation for existing staff members and their development. If they think that this is the road that they want to go on, how much are they being cultivated? It seems like you were doing that work.
Right. And I was always attentive to that and watching who might be a good candidate. And like I said, I thought I had a great one. Uh,
Mhm.
but she left just a year before I left. That didn't work out, but it could have. Really didn't see anybody else that was ready to step in and be president. Again, my senior people were mostly scientists. So they were all science. All my senior people were scientists, except the development director, and they did not want to do that job. So they wouldn't have enjoyed it, I don't think. Yeah, so we didn't really have anybody internal left. My former person was COO, good financial person, also very smart intellectually, understood the problems we were working on. If you got somebody internally, I think that's a good way to go myself. But, people will have different opinions on that.
Can you talk a little bit about now being president of Climate Common and what that work is and what you're looking to do differently? What are you trying to solve and how do you see potentially solving that?
I talked a little bit about this earlier. I I had this philosophy going on in me that said we're going to have to bridge these barriers in our society to get big problems solved, like climate change. I
Mhm.
don't know why it got politicized, 20 years ago, like COVID. I mean, how did vaccinations get politicized? I mean, it just seems insane. It
No
is might
idea.
seem insane, but that's what we've got. You can either fight it out to the death or
Mhm.
you can start to work on another way, which is building relationships of trust
Mhm.
with people who see and experience the world differently
Mhm.
from you. It's a very painstaking thing to try to do,
Yeah.
to find people who are different, but
Mhm.
that you can develop a relationship with and then do something
Yeah.
together, a project
Mhm.
together. So I wanted the time to do that and to figure it out. So I created our climate common. The name implies that we all got this one climate. We all
Mhm.
share it. I don't care what your politics are. Your atmosphere is my atmosphere. With the notion of trying to establish projects of working with people who are different to demonstrate that we can, in fact, work together, even
Mhm.
if we see things differently. We have enough in common. We can build on that and do something useful together. I view it as kind of an antidote to the polarization we've gotten ourselves into. I'm just one person, and I know I can't save the world, but I
Mhm.
can at least start projects with people who are different that demonstrates this can be done. Just think we need a lot more of it.
Absolutely.
Everybody needs to be working on bridging these divides. And I wanted the time to do that without being encumbered with a
Yeah.
complicated governance structure. I had some colleagues that knew me and were willing to be on my new board. There's only 5 people on the board, small board.
Yeah.
I'm the only staff member.
Mhm.
And I said, this is what I want to do. Will you serve on the board and help me think it through?
Yeah.
They said yes. So it's a very trim, very small, I do the bookkeeping. I do everything. I've learned how to do QuickBooks in the last month.
Yeah.
Not saying this is for everybody, but the point I'm trying to make is I hadn't, and I said it in the article, I hadn't realized, oh, there's some other way to do this because you get so entrenched in what you're
Uh-huh.
doing and how you're doing it. You're just trying to get till tomorrow or
Uh-huh.
maybe next week, and you don't really stop and think about, could I be doing something differently? Could I be doing something different? Are my skills being used? You just don't
Mhm.
have time to think. So when you don't have time to think, you can't see an alternative future for yourself. When I submitted my resignation, I didn't know what I was going to do. Had no idea. Just knew that I was going to figure out a way to use my skills in the way I wanted to. Every day, all day, I know this sounds crazy. Every day, all day, I don't spend a minute doing something I don't want to be doing. And I've set it up that way.
Yeah.
I don't take on things that might put me in a stressed out position
Mhm.
such that I can't do the things I want to do well. And it worked. Worked. And I know everybody's not in a maybe not in the financial position that they could do that. I
Yeah.
was, and I needed some income, but I didn't need what I was making at the time. So I had the luxury of taking a time out and figuring out some alternative pathway. And my only point is there are things you can do. You don't have to stay in the on the rat wheel. If you're on a rat wheel, you can get off of it. You have to be methodical about it and think it through. What I hadn't realized was there is any other way. I thought I must have to do this till I retire or till I die or whatever. But what I tried to do in the article is to help people see that at least one person figured out a way out. I've gotten a lot of emails from people who said, "Thank you for saying what I've been feeling. Didn't know what to do. I didn't know. I just thought I was stuck." You're not necessarily stuck. That was kind of the purpose of the article. I do think nonprofits, I think we created the rat wheel. Somehow
Mhm.
we've created the rat wheel,
Mhm.
and it's not healthy in
Mhm.
my view. And it's not just the nonprofit sector, the for profit sector are on rat wheels too. It's kind of a weird thing that we've gotten ourselves into. We don't have time to think. It's not just for our own mental well being, that's a nice byproduct. But the ability to have time to think about what you're doing solves problems faster.
Yeah.
That's my point. We're only costing ourselves and the purpose of our organizations by
Yeah.
being so stressed and not taking the time to think about what we're doing.
In terms of folks who don't necessarily have the ability to leave and start an organization where they can curate their own work experience that allows for that time and they're still within the confines of the way that their organizations work. Are there some tips that you could give them that would help them and their staff carve out even a little bit of space to do some of the bigger thinking? So it's not just dealing with the drudgery of the day to day. We have to get all these things done, but not really giving yourself time to figure out, well, are all those things that we're doing solving for the reason why we exist?
I'll answer that in a minute. One of my board members read the article, the current board members read the article and said, "No, all the articles I ever see about burnout are directed at the staff person.
Mhm.
What the staff person could do differently, as if it's somehow your fault. You're burnt out." I thought that was a really good point, which I then put in the final version of the article because it's not our fault as a staff. And I've been regular program staff person for a long time. Don't feel like it's your fault. First of all, even though there are self help things you can do, I feel like the change needs to come from the board level and probably the CEO level. So there are things I wish I would have done differently as a CEO. But I think if I were a staff person, under the CEO level, and you're stressed out or burnt out or on the verge of, and have been, because we all go through periods of we just have a lot of work to do. That's life. That's
Absolutely.
normal. It's just what it is. Things pile up sometimes. You get through it and move on. But I think it's more like a chronic stressed out problem that we have a lot of now, just the way it is every day. I think I would go to my CEO if I were stressed out and say, "I'm stressed out." And I'd give him my article and say, "Look, I feel like I don't have time to think about the problems that I'm working on. It's not in your interest, CEO. It's not in my interest. It's not in the organization's interest. Would you help me figure out a way to create some space for me to think about what I'm doing? And my it was a pretty simple suggestion in the article was, to that you would need your CEO to be behind you is to take a fifth day, to fit whatever one of the 5 days of the normal work week, and don't schedule anything. Just read and think or talk to people outside that you may not have had time to talk to before that could give you a new perspective. Just something to give you uh, some time to think and
Yeah.
see a new way. I think you have to carve out that space, and it's very difficult without the support of your CEO. Because otherwise, there's always another proposal to write. It's like the arms race or something. You have to have more proposals out the door.
I
It just
know.
never stops. And I think the CEO needs to set the stage for that space, and the board needs to support the CEO in doing that. It originates with the board. The
Mhm.
board needs to want this from their staff, and they
Yeah.
need to make sure that the CEO has the support to provide that space. And in the end, it may come down to money, which everything does. How do you support the staff 1 day a week for essentially just thinking? I mean, we were an organization supported mostly by competitive grants. So, we didn't have a large membership or service that we provided. We always had to reinvent ourselves almost the work we did. But even those in the service, more of a service, social service, still seem like they don't have time to really think about what they're doing. At the top, the CEO and board level, I would go to the CEO if I were, a staff member and say,
Mhm.
I need help thinking this through. Could you help me think it through? And hopefully they've got a CEO that will work with them. And the CEO ought to go to the board, say,
Mhm.
I'm getting feedback from my staff that they're burned out. I need your help and your support. Get them out of that situation. And, maybe the board chair could meet with the staff or something and say, I hear you. Here's what we're going to do to address this issue, or how I'm going to support the CEO in addressing this. I haven't read the self help books about burnout, so I'm not an expert
Mhm.
on what you would do, what you could do. There's things like don't read your email except you know or a certain window of the day. Don't get distracted because our days are very fragmented. You have to have some discipline to not let the system fragment you all day long. It's easier to answer an email than to think through a complex problem. We tend to do that. Anyway, got to figure out a way to make the time to give yourself some space.
For those who are transitioning into those more formalized leadership role, you don't need to wait until your staff is burned out before you create that space. Solve for this before it becomes a problem.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said in the article, there's more attention on growing revenue than it is on solving problems. That's not right.
You're not maybe going to be able to start with that full day, but can you start with putting 10 minutes in your day that is just quiet? That was one of the things that resonated with me with your article because I believe in setting up intentional time where it's blocked off your calendar, where you are doing nothing but reading and learning and thinking. I don't remember who the quote is from, but said if you want to solve a problem, you should be spending 55 minutes thinking about the problem and only 5 minutes thinking about the solution. Because thinking about all aspects of what the problem is really where you start to see how things can look differently. Article I find helpful, and I think other leaders would find very helpful as well.
If you could set an hour aside a day or even a day a week, it only works if you're not so stressed about what you're not getting done during that hour or that
Yeah.
day. There were too many times where I could have tried to do that, but I would not have succeeded. I knew how much was piled up, not
Mm-hmm.
getting done. That's not right. It's not healthy. And I think we can change that. We could change that. But it's going to take an awareness that it's a problem. Okay, my name is John. I got a stressed out problem. I got to do something about it. And it comes first. Yeah. So I hope my article helped people at
Mm-hmm.
least acknowledge that it is not an uncommon problem for people to be so stressed they're going to burn out or are burning out.
Yeah, and that you as the leader set that tone and you need to be intentional in making that space because staff don't have not necessarily the agency, but maybe they just don't feel like they are able to come to you to ask for that time. So you're going to have to be the one to change the tone for your organization.
Exactly. Yeah, and I in retrospect, I should have done more as CEO. I mean, that is a regret I've got that I didn't
Mm.
do more for the staff. I mean, by the time I realized, oh, this is not right for me, I had decided to leave. But I should have done more to inform the board about this problem. And
Mhm.
actually, I tried and got sort of a ho hum from a board member, which that was when I really had decided to leave. Oh,
Yeah.
she didn't really care. Didn't seem to resonate with her. So I realized I needed to move on. So anyway, I could have done more and wouldn't make that mistake again now that I know what I know.
Thankfully, that's a lesson that you learned that now somebody else may not have to go through the same because they're hearing it from you. So that's
Well,
helpful.
it took me 2 years to write that article, by the way. I was mostly thinking about it for the first year and tried to put
Uh-huh.
pen to paper the second year. Kind of a personal story. So it was hard to tell that way. But I wanted to make sure it connected with other people. But anyway, I'm glad Stanford published it and people seem to be reading it. It might help some other people.
I think so. And thank you so much for making the time to talk a little bit about it and to talk about your story. Yeah, the idea that we need to be thinking about the problems that we're solving for, making it part of the DNA of your organization. Every staff member, leadership, board, this should be part of the way that you work, I think is a revolutionary idea.
I agree
Or
with
that
you. It is a revolutionary idea to that point. And maybe, maybe we'll get there. Maybe people will start to reconfigure it. It's a cultural thing. So
Mhm.
it's a deep change that we're talking about.
Well, John, thank you so much again. Would like to give you just an opportunity if you have any final thoughts that you wanted to share. And then also, how can folks stay connected to you, support your organization? Just let us know.
But I put at the end of the article obviously my email address and said
Mhm.
anybody that wants to reach me, write me here. Just make sure you put the article on the whatever wherever this is posted that they can reach me. I'm happy to talk to anybody. Several people have called and talked to me already and just sort of shared their personal experience. I'm happy to talk to people and I want to hear their stories too. So I'm here, easily accessible.
Yes, as I know, since I followed the end of the article and reached out to John,
Hey,
and that's why
yeah.
he's here.
Hey, Michelle, meet you. Let's do a
I can
podcast.
see it's very accessible. Just very nice to be having a conversation with you. So thank you for making the time, John.
Thank you for the invitation. Take
All
care.
right.
Have a good
Thanks,
day.
everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Bye bye.